My name is Natalie Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. I never thought I'd see the day when my own mother would disown me through a text message. The words stared back at me from my phone. Don't call or come over. We're done. My hands trembled, but something inside me hardened. After all she'd taken from me, this felt like freedom. I typed back, "Got your last wish." Then I clicked send. What Mom didn't know was that I had just discovered papers that would change everything about our family's finances and her perfect little world. Before I dive into this roller coaster of a story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever had to stand up to toxic family, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more stories about finding strength when those who should love you most let you down. Now let's get into how my mother's final rejection became my greatest liberation. My relationship with my mother, Rebecca, wasn't always this broken. Growing up, we were incredibly close. She was a single mom who worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads after my dad left when I was 4. We were a team at least until Richard came into the picture and everything changed. 2 weeks ago, I attended what would become our final family dinner. I drove to their suburban home with actual excitement bubbling inside me. After years of hard work and sacrifices, I had finally received a promotion to executive marketing director at my firm. It came with a substantial raise, my own team, and the validation I'd been chasing for years. I couldn't wait to share my news. The moment I walked in, I should have known it would go badly. Richard, my stepfather of 15 years, barely looked up from his phone when I entered. He was a tall, imposing man with cold eyes that never seemed to warm when they landed on me. "You're late," was his only greeting. "Traffic was awful." "Sorry," I replied, trying to keep things light. I handed my mother a bottle of her favorite wine. Mom accepted it with a quick smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Kimberly's been here for an hour already. We were about to start without you." Ah, Kimberly, my stepsister, who could do no wrong in my mother's eyes. She sat at the dining table, perfect as always, with her immaculate blonde hair and designer outfit. "Hey, Nat," she said, barely looking up. "Nice of you to finally join us." I swallowed the retort that threatened to escape and took my seat at the table. The first 20 minutes were filled with mundane conversation about Richard's golf game and the neighbor's new swimming pool. When there was finally a lull, I seized my opportunity. "I have some good news," I said, unable to keep the smile off my face. "I got the promotion at work. I'm now the executive marketing director." I waited for the congratulations, the questions, the excitement. Instead, my mother nodded briefly and said, "That's nice, dear." Before I could elaborate, Kimberly jumped in. "Speaking of good news, guess who got asked to join the charity board at the country club? The youngest member ever." My mother's face transformed. Her eyes lit up and she reached across to squeeze Kimberly's hand. "That's wonderful, Richard. Did you hear that? Our girl is making such important connections." Richard beamed with pride. "That's my daughter. Always exceeding expectations." The contrast in their reactions was like a slap to the face. My executive promotion, something I'd worked years for, warranted a mere "that's nice," while Kimberly's country club position warranted celebration. "Mom, did you hear what I said? This is a huge deal for me. I'll be managing an entire division now." I tried again. "Yes, Natalie, I heard you." "It's very nice," she repeated, her eyes already drifting back to Kimberly. "But joining the charity board is quite prestigious. Those connections will last a lifetime." Richard took a sip of his wine and looked at me with that smug expression I'd grown to hate. "Speaking of lasting, how's the dating scene? Natalie found anyone who'll stick around longer than Jake did?" The mention of my ex-husband sent a jolt of pain through my chest. Our divorce had been finalized just 6 months ago after he'd cheated with his assistant, a classic cliche that still managed to destroy my world. "That's not appropriate, Richard," I said firmly. "Just asking. After all, you're not getting any younger, and after one failed marriage, He trailed off with a shrug. Richard is just concerned, my mother chimed in, defending him as always. We both worry about you living alone in that apartment working all those hours. It's not natural for a woman your age. What's not natural is dismissing my career achievement to focus on my love life. I countered, feeling the familiar tension building. And for the record, I'm doing perfectly fine on my own. Kimberly snickered. Being defensive isn't attractive, Nat. Mom and Dad are just looking out for you. They're not both my parents, I said before I could stop myself. And I don't need anyone looking out for me. My mother's face hardened. Natalie, that's enough. Richard has been more of a father to you than your real dad ever was. That was the breaking point. 15 years of pent-up frustration came pouring out. More of a father. He's never supported me, never shown interest in my life, and never missed an opportunity to remind me that I'm not his real daughter. That's not true, my mother gasped. It is true, and you've let him do it. You've chosen him and Kimberly over me every single time. Richard slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. After everything we've done for you, this is the gratitude we get. Your mother deserves better than this attitude. I stood up, trembling with emotion. You're right. She does deserve better. She deserves a husband who doesn't turn her against her own daughter, and I deserve a mother who stands up for me. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, my mother's voice calling after me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't bear another minute in that house where I would always be second best, where my achievements would never measure up to Kimberly's, where my pain would never matter as much as keeping Richard happy. As I drove away, I had no idea that this argument would lead to my mother's final text, or the revelations that would follow. The dinner disaster wasn't an isolated incident. It was merely the latest in a long pattern of betrayals that stretched back 15 years to when Richard first entered our lives. Before him, it was just Mom and me against the world. She was my hero, fierce, loving, and endlessly supportive. I still remember how she would sit up with me late into the night, helping with science projects, or how she saved for months to buy me a special dress for my 8th grade dance. Everything changed when she met Richard Bradford at a company party. He was charming, successful, and had a 10-year-old daughter, Kimberly, from his previous marriage. Within 6 months, they were married, and we moved into his large house in the affluent part of town. I was 17 and initially excited for my mother to have found happiness. The first betrayal came just before college. Throughout high school, I'd worked part-time jobs and maintained a 4 gigapascals, knowing my mother had been saving for my education since I was born. We had often talked about which universities I might attend. Your college fund is growing nicely, she would tell me proudly. By the time you're ready, there should be enough for you to go wherever you get accepted. 2 months before applications were due, I asked about the account to include the information on financial aid forms. Oh, my mother said, not quite meeting my eyes. There's been a change of plans with that money. Richard stepped in, his voice smooth and reasonable. We've had to reallocate those funds. The house needed a new roof, and Kimberly's private school tuition increased substantially. But that money was for my education, I protested. Family resources need to benefit the whole family, Richard replied firmly. You can take out student loans like most kids your age. It builds character. My mother said nothing. She looked uncomfortable, but didn't contradict him. When I appealed to her later in private, she said Richard knows about finances. We need to trust him on this. I ended up attending State University on scholarships and loans, working nearly full-time throughout to make ends meet. Meanwhile, Kimberly was sent to an expensive private university 2 years later with all expenses covered. The second betrayal came after my father died unexpectedly when I was 20. Though he hadn't been in my life consistently, he had maintained occasional contact. When he passed away from a sudden heart attack, he left behind a modest collection of belongings, including some family heirlooms and items from my childhood. Before I could even process my grief, Richard had arranged for most of my father's possessions to be donated or sold. "It's taking up space in the garage," he explained when I discovered what had happened. "Besides, it's not like you were close to him." When I confronted my mother, tears streaming down my face, she simply said, "Richard thought it was for the best. We need to move forward, not dwell in the past." The third betrayal occurred at my wedding to Jake 5 years ago. What should have been one of the happiest days of my life became another opportunity for my mother to prioritize Kimberly. Although I was the bride, my mother seemed more concerned about Kimberly's role as bridesmaid than about me. She spent the morning of my wedding helping Kimberly with her hair and makeup, arriving at my preparation room just 30 minutes before the ceremony. During the reception, she redirected conversations to highlight Kimberly's recent achievements, telling guests, "You should see how beautiful Kimberly looks in formal wear she modeled in a charity fashion show last month." Even my father-daughter dance became about Richard and Kimberly, with my mother insisting on a special spotlight dance for them immediately after. "It's important that Kimberly feels included," she explained when I questioned this addition to our wedding timeline. The fourth betrayal cut the deepest. When Jake left me for his assistant after 3 years of marriage, I was devastated. I turned to my mother for support, only to be met with judgment. "Well, what did you expect working those long hours?" she said when I called her sobbing. "A man needs attention, Natalie. Maybe if you'd been more available, this wouldn't have happened." "He cheated on me, Mom," I said, shocked by her response. "This isn't my fault. I'm not saying it's all your fault, but relationships take work. Richard and I have been married for 12 years now because I make our home life a priority." Instead of supporting me through one of the most painful experiences of my life, she used it as another opportunity to highlight how I didn't measure up to her and Kimberly's standards. Despite all this, I kept forgiving her, making excuses for her behavior. "She's just trying to make her marriage work," I told myself. "She doesn't realize how she's hurting me." I clung to memories of the mother she used to be, believing that woman was still in there somewhere. My best friend Laura warned me repeatedly about this pattern. "She's chosen her new family," Laura would say gently. "You keep getting hurt because you expect her to be someone she's not anymore." "She's still my mom," I would reply. Family is family. But as I would soon discover, the concept of family had been weaponized against me for years, used to extract forgiveness for unforgivable betrayals, while never extending the same loyalty to me. The text that ended everything came 3 days after the disastrous dinner, but it wasn't the argument that prompted my mother's final rejection. It was what happened the day after. I'd gone to my parents' house to help my mother organize some paperwork. It was our usual peace offering. After arguments, I would help with some task. She would make lunch, and we would pretend nothing had happened. The cycle had repeated dozens of times over the years. Mom had asked me to sort through some old files in her home office while she prepared sandwiches. As I organized the papers, I came across a folder labeled "Mitchell Trust Natalie." Curious, I opened it. Inside were legal documents I'd never seen before, documents about my maternal grandmother's estate. Grandma Elaine had died when I was 14, and I'd always been told she left everything to my mother, her only child. But these papers told a different story. My grandmother had established a trust specifically for me, with a substantial amount of money earmarked for my education and future. According to the documents, the trust should have provided over $150,000 for college, and an additional $75,000 when I turned 25. Money I had never received. Money that would have changed everything about my young adult life. My hands shook as I read through page after page of bank statements showing withdrawals from the trust. One for $30,000 labeled Kimberly freshman year. Another for $45,000 marked vacation property down payment. There were dozens of withdrawals over the years, systematically draining the money that should have been mine. When my mother walked in with sandwiches, she found me surrounded by the damning evidence. "What are you doing with those?" she demanded, her face draining of color. "What am I doing? What did you do, Mom?" I held up the statements. "This was my money. Grandma left it for me." She set down the plate and crossed her arms. "It's complicated, Natalie. It doesn't seem complicated at all. You and Richard stole from me." "We didn't steal anything," she said defensively. "I'm your mother. That makes me the trustee. Being the trustee doesn't give you the right to use the money for Kimberly or for a vacation home." Her expression hardened. "Do you have any idea how expensive it was raising you? The sacrifices I made, that money was compensation for everything I did for you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Compensation. You're my mother. You chose to have me. Grandma left that money specifically for my education, not as a parenting fee. "You're being childish about this," she said dismissively. "Richard and I made decisions that were best for the family as a whole." "Your family, you mean. Not me. Never me." At that moment, Richard walked in, immediately sensing the tension. "What's going on here?" I held up the trust documents. "I know about the money you took from me. My grandmother's trust." His face darkened. "You're digging through our private financial records now. That's a new low, Natalie. They're not your private records. They're documents about my trust." Richard stepped closer. His imposing height meant to intimidate me as it had so many times before. "Listen carefully. That money was used for family purposes, which benefited you too. But if you want to make trouble about this, remember that your mother and I have resources you don't. Legal action would be very unwise." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm advising you as someone who cares about this family's well-being." Before I could respond, Kimberly appeared in the doorway. "What's all the yelling about?" When she saw the papers in my hand, her expression changed. "Oh, great. Is Nat having another meltdown?" "Your education was paid for with money stolen from me," I told her bluntly. Instead of showing shock or remorse, Kimberly laughed. "God, you're so dramatic. Always playing the victim." That's when I realized none of them saw anything wrong with what they'd done. In their minds, taking what was rightfully mine was completely justified because they didn't see me as fully part of their family. I was an outsider whose resources could be commandeered for the real family members. I gathered the documents, shoving them into my bag. "I'm taking these." "Those belong to us," Richard said sharply. "No, they belong to me, and I'm going to find out exactly what legal options I have." My mother finally spoke again, her voice cold. "If you walk out that door with those papers, don't bother coming back." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. "Is that your choice? After everything you're choosing them over me again?" "I'm choosing family peace over your selfish dramatics," she replied. Without another word, I walked out the trust documents securely in my bag. The next day, I received her text, "Don't call or come over. We're done." And that's when I replied, "Got your last wish." Little did she know just how much I meant it. The day after receiving my mother's final text, I sat in Laura's apartment, a cup of coffee growing cold between my trembling hands. I'd known Laura since college. She was the sister I should have had, loyal, honest, and fiercely protective. She also happened to work as a financial investigator for an insurance company, making her the perfect person to help me understand my options. "This is serious," Laura said, reviewing the trust documents spread across her kitchen table. "Based on these papers, there's no question your mother and Richard misappropriated funds that were legally yours." I ran my fingers through my hair, exhausted from a night without sleep. But can I actually do anything about it? Richard made it clear they'd fight me if I tried. "Richard is counting on you doing what you've always done, backing down to keep the peace." Laura looked at me intently. "But this time is different." You have documentation, and from what I can see, the improper use of these funds is clear-cut. She picked up her phone. I think you should talk to James. He specializes in cases like this. James Taylor was an attorney friend of Laura's who specialized in inheritance fraud and financial elder abuse. Within an hour, he was sitting at Laura's table with us, reviewing the documents with a practiced eye. The statute of limitations varies for different types of financial crimes, James explained, but based on what I'm seeing here, you're still within the time frame to take legal action. The trust was very clearly written. Your grandmother wanted this money to go specifically to your education and your future, not to your stepsister's education or a vacation home. So I can sue them, I asked, my stomach tightening at the thought. You can. And I believe you would have a strong case. James leaned forward. But I need to ask you something important. Are you prepared for what this will mean for your relationship with your family? I laughed bitterly. What relationship? My mother just texted me that we're done. She's chosen Richard and Kimberly over me my entire adult life. Even so, James said gently, legal action makes everything very real, very fast. There's no going back once we start this process. I stared at the documents, evidence of years of betrayal and manipulation. My entire adult life had been shaped by financial hardships that should never have existed. Student loans I was still paying off. The tiny apartment I could barely afford while working 3 jobs during college. The stress that contributed to problems in my marriage. I keep thinking about who I could have been, I said quietly. The opportunities I missed because I was working extra shifts instead of taking internships. The career connections I couldn't make because I couldn't afford to attend networking events. The freedom I never had because I've been drowning in debt that should never have existed. Laura placed her hand over mine. This isn't just about the money, is it? No, I admitted. It's about finally standing up for myself. About breaking this cycle where I keep forgiving them while they keep taking from me. James nodded. Then let's talk strategy. We'll need to gather additional evidence. Bank records, withdrawal authorizations, anything showing the systematic misuse of the trust. Over the next hour, we developed a plan. First, we would send formal requests for all financial records related to the trust. Then, once we had complete documentation, we would file a civil suit for the recovery of the misappropriated funds plus interest and potential damages. What about criminal charges? Laura asked. James shook his head. Let's focus on the civil case first. It has a lower burden of proof, and frankly, recovery of the funds should be your primary goal. As they discussed legal strategies, I found myself wavering. This was my mother. We were talking about the woman who had once stayed up all night making my Halloween costume, who had held me through my first heartbreak, who had taught me to be strong. I don't know if I can do this, I whispered. Laura turned to me, her expression serious. Nat, I love you, and I'll support whatever decision you make. But I need to remind you of something. This isn't the first time they've betrayed you. It's just the first time you have proof. She recounted each previous betrayal, the college fund, my father's belongings, my wedding, my divorce. Each time you forgave them, each time you tried again, and each time they showed you exactly who they are. She's my mother, I said weakly. Yes, and mothers are supposed to protect their children, not steal from them, not threaten them, not choose a husband and his daughter over their own child repeatedly. James added gently, the legal system exists precisely for situations like this when the people who should protect us are the ones causing harm. I took a deep breath, remembering my mother's cold expression as she delivered her ultimatum, Richard's threatening stance, Kimberly's mocking laughter. For 15 years, I had been the family scapegoat, the outsider, the one whose needs always came last. Okay, I said finally, my voice stronger than I expected. Let's do this. Not just for the money, but for justice. for the truth to finally be acknowledged. As I left Laura's apartment that evening with a folder full of next steps and James's business card, I felt something unexpected, a weight lifting. For the first time in years, I wasn't making excuses for my mother's behavior or minimizing my own pain. I was standing up for myself, and it felt like taking the first full breath after years of shallow breathing. The fight ahead would be difficult, but I was no longer the same Natalie who kept returning for more hurt. This Natalie was ready to fight back. 2 weeks after my meeting with Laura and James, our plan moved into action. James sent formal legal letters to my mother and Richard requesting all financial documentation related to my grandmother's trust, including withdrawal authorizations and bank statements for the past 15 years. The response was immediate and exactly as we'd anticipated. My phone exploded with notifications. 10 missed calls from my mother, 5 from Richard. Voicemails ranging from my mother's tearful pleas. "Natalie, what are you doing? We need to talk about this," to Richard's increasingly threatening messages. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Back off now before you regret it." I followed James's advice and didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded the voicemails to him, particularly Richard's more threatening ones, which James noted could potentially be useful later. The fact that they're panicking is a good sign, James told me during our follow-up meeting. It means they know they're vulnerable. But the pressure was just beginning. 3 days after the letters were sent, I was at work reviewing marketing proposals when the receptionist called. "Natalie, there's a Kimberly Bradford here insisting on seeing you. She says it's a family emergency." My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "Tell her I'm in a meeting and unavailable." 15 minutes later, my office door burst open, and there stood Kimberly. Her perfect blonde hair disheveled, her face flushed with anger. "How dare you?" she shouted, waving what I assumed was a copy of the legal letter. "After everything Mom and Dad have done for you." I rose from my desk, maintaining my composure, despite the adrenaline surging through my body. "Kimberly, this is my workplace. You need to leave. Not until you explain why you're attacking our family with these ridiculous legal threats." Her voice echoed down the hallway, drawing curious glances from my colleagues. "This isn't the place for this discussion," I said firmly. "Please leave before I call security." "You would do that, have me thrown out," she laughed incredulously. "God, you really are pathetic. Mom was right about you all along." Before I could respond, my coworker Amy appeared at the door. "Everything okay in here? Security is on their way up." Kimberly glared at me. "This isn't over. Mom is devastated and Dad is furious. You have no idea what you've started." As security escorted her out, I collapsed back into my chair, shaking. Amy closed my office door and sat across from me. "So that was dramatic," she said, with a raised eyebrow. "Want to talk about it?" Amy Jenkins was the creative director at our firm. We'd worked together for years, but had always maintained a professional relationship rather than a friendship. Now, looking at her concerned expression, I found myself telling her everything: the trust, the years of manipulation, the legal action I was taking. "Wow," Amy said when I finished. "That's a lot. And now you're worried about your job too?" I nodded. "Kimberly making a scene here is just the beginning. Richard has connections everywhere. He's threatened to make trouble for me professionally before." To my surprise, Amy reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "Let me be clear, your job is not in danger. If anything like that happens, you come straight to me." Her unexpected support brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me for basic human decency," Amy replied with a wry smile. "Now, let's get back to those marketing proposals before we both turn into emotional messes." Amy's support gave me strength for what came next: the meeting with my family's lawyer, Harold Winston. He requested a meeting at his downtown office, which James advised me to attend with him present. Harold was in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive suit that screamed old money and establishment connections. He greeted me with artificial warmth before his expression hardened upon seeing James. "I wasn't aware Miss Mitchell would be bringing counsel," he said stiffly. Given the nature of this situation, it seemed prudent. James replied smoothly. Harold directed his attention back to me. "Natalie, I've known your family for years. Richard has been a client of mine since before he married your mother. This legal action you're contemplating is causing tremendous distress to your parents." "Richard is not my parent," I corrected him. "And the distress they're experiencing now doesn't compare to what I've been through discovering they systematically stole my inheritance." Harold's patronizing smile made my skin crawl. "That's a very serious accusation, and frankly, a gross mischaracterization. Your mother, as trustee, made discretionary decisions about fund allocations that benefited the family unit. Paying for Kimberly's education and a vacation home did not benefit Natalie," James interjected. "And the trust documents explicitly stated the funds were for Natalie's education and future. There was no discretionary clause that would have permitted those expenditures." "These are complex legal matters." "They're actually not that complex," I interrupted, surprising myself with my confidence. "My grandmother left money for me. My mother and Richard took it and used it for themselves and Kimberly. Now I want it back with interest." Harold's facade cracked slightly. "Be reasonable, Natalie. Think about the damage this will do to your family relationships. My mother already texted me that we're done. Richard has left threatening voicemails. Kimberly showed up at my workplace causing a scene. What exactly am I damaging that they haven't already destroyed?" The meeting continued for another 30 minutes with Harold alternating between condescension and thinly veiled threats about the difficulty and expense of pursuing legal action. When James presented evidence that we had already uncovered about other financial improprieties in Richard's business dealings, Harold's demeanor changed noticeably. As we left the office, James turned to me with an impressed look. "You held your ground beautifully in there. Winston is known for intimidating people into backing down." "I'm surprised myself," I admitted. "A month ago, I would have probably crumbled and apologized for causing trouble." "What changed?" I thought about it for a moment. "I guess I finally realized I deserve better, and that no matter how much I try to earn their love, they're never going to give it freely." That night alone in my apartment, doubts crept in. The legal process would be long and potentially expensive, even with James taking my case on a contingency basis. Richard and my mother had resources and connections. I didn't. What if I was just setting myself up for more hurt? As I contemplated backing down, my phone pinged with a text from Laura. "How did the meeting go? Remember, you're stronger than you think." Followed by another from Amy. "Just checking in after today's drama. Let me know if you need anything. You've got this." 2 simple messages of support, more genuine care than my mother had shown me in years. They reminded me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who stands beside you when things get hard. I texted James, "I want to continue, no matter what." His response came quickly. "Good, because we just found something interesting about Richard's financial history. Call me tomorrow." I fell asleep that night with a strange new feeling, hope mixed with determination. The fight had just begun, but for once I wasn't fighting alone. I knew Richard and my mother wouldn't take my legal action lying down, but I underestimated just how dirty they would play. Within days of our meeting with Harold Winston, the counterattack began. My Aunt Deborah, my mother's sister who lived across the country, called me out of the blue. We'd never been particularly close, but her tone was ice cold. "I just got off the phone with your mother," she said without preamble. "She told me everything about how you're suing them after all they've done for you." "Did she tell you they stole over $200,000 from the trust my grandmother set up for me?" I asked calmly. She explained about the family finances and how they used that money for the benefit of everyone, including you. Honestly, Natalie, I always thought you were the sensible one in the family. This money-grabbing behavior is shocking. Similar calls followed from other family members and family friends, all of them given a carefully crafted version of events that painted me as an ungrateful daughter extorting my loving parents for money. I was being systematically isolated from my extended family. Then came the annual Mitchell family reunion, a tradition started by my grandmother that had continued after her death. I received no invitation. When I texted my cousin Taylor about it, she replied awkwardly that she thought I wouldn't be coming given the circumstances. What circumstances, I asked. You know, the lawsuit and everything. Your mom said you made it clear you didn't consider yourself part of the family anymore. I didn't want to get in the middle of it. The exclusion hurt more than I wanted to admit. These were people I'd known my entire life, now treating me like a pariah, based entirely on my mother and Richard's version of events. The isolation was just the beginning. A few days later, I found a note tucked under my apartment door. Drop the lawsuit or things will get worse. It wasn't signed, but the threat was clear. I reported it to James, who advised me to file a police report, even though there was little they could do without evidence of who left it. Document everything he emphasized. This kind of intimidation actually helps our case. A week later, I came home from work to find my car with a long scratch down the driver's side and another note, last warning. This time, my neighbor, Mrs. Patel, approached me as I was examining the damage. I saw who did that, she said in a low voice. A young blonde woman. She was very upset talking to herself. I thought about calling the police, but she left so quickly. Kimberly. Of course it was Kimberly. The most direct attack came at work. I was called into a meeting with the head of HR and my direct supervisor looking uncomfortable. Natalie, we've received a concerning call, my supervisor began. Someone claiming to be a business associate of your stepfather suggested there might be some financial impropriety on your part that could reflect poorly on the company. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. That would be Richard Bradford trying to intimidate me because I'm pursuing legal action against him for stealing my inheritance. He's attempting to threaten my livelihood because he knows he's legally vulnerable. The HR director looked relieved. That aligns with what we suspected. The accusations were vague and seemed personally motivated. I can provide documentation of the legal case, if needed, I offered. That won't be necessary, my supervisor assured me. But we wanted to give you the courtesy of knowing this happened. As I turned to leave, the HR director added, Natalie, if you experience any further harassment related to this personal matter, please let us know immediately. I thanked them, but inside I was seething. Richard had actually tried to get me fired. The line had been crossed from family drama to actively trying to destroy my life. When I told Amy what had happened, her outrage matched mine. That's completely unacceptable, she fumed. Tell me you're not backing down after this. Absolutely not, I assured her. If anything, I'm more determined now. But the truth was, the pressure was getting to me. Each night, I came home to an apartment that no longer felt safe. I jumped at every noise, checked my locks repeatedly, and slept poorly. The constant stress was taking its toll. One particularly bad night, after finding my mailbox pried open and my mail scattered, I called Laura in tears. I don't know if I can do this anymore, I confessed. They're not going to stop. Maybe I should just drop everything and try to move on. Nat, listen to me, Laura said firmly. This escalation means you're winning. Richard is terrified of what you might uncover. Strong people don't resort to intimidation unless they're desperate, but my life is a nightmare right now. Then let's make it less of a nightmare. First thing tomorrow, we're installing security cameras at your apartment. My boyfriend's company does installations, he'll do it for free. True to her word, Laura arrived the next morning with her boyfriend Marcus and enough security equipment to monitor Fort Knox. By afternoon, every approach to my apartment was under surveillance with alerts sent directly to my phone. Now for step 2, Laura announced once the installation was complete. "You're not staying here alone until this is resolved. You'll stay with me on weeknights and we'll have friends stay here on weekends." I started to protest, but Laura cut me off. "This isn't negotiable. You need to be safe and you need to not be alone right now." She was right, of course. The security and support made an immediate difference in my mental state. Just knowing I wasn't facing this alone gave me strength. That strength was tested 3 days later when my security cameras caught Kimberly trying to pick the lock on my apartment door at 2:30 inches the morning. The footage was clear as day. Her face, her actions, even her frustrated muttering when she couldn't get the door open. I sent the footage directly to James, who called me first thing in the morning. "This is exactly what we needed," he said, his voice animated. "We're filing for a restraining order today. This crosses the line from harassment into attempted breaking and entering." The restraining order was granted within 48 hours, legally prohibiting Kimberly from coming within 500 feet of me, my home, or my workplace. When I texted Laura the news, she replied, "First victory of many. They're showing their true colors, and it's only making our case stronger." She was right. Each desperate move my mother and Richard made only reinforced that they knew they were wrong. Their attempts to intimidate me instead gave me the evidence and resolve to fight harder. The frightened daughter, who had always backed down to keep the peace, was gone. In her place stood a woman who refused to be victimized any longer, a woman who was finally fighting back. 3 weeks into our legal battle, I received an email that would change everything. It arrived late on a Tuesday night with the subject line RE, Richard Bradford, information you need. My first instinct was to delete it as spam or another intimidation tactic, but something made me open it. "My name is Brian Bradford. I'm Richard's son from his first marriage. I've been following your case through court filings, and I believe I have information that could help you. I was also disinherited by my father. If you're willing to meet, I have documents you should see. Verify my identity however you need to. I understand this will seem suspicious." I immediately forwarded the email to James and Laura, asking for their thoughts. "Could be legitimate, could be a trap," James replied cautiously. "If you decide to meet, do it in a public place. Bring someone with you and let me know when and where." Laura was more direct. "I'm free tomorrow. Let's meet him together." After confirming through social media and public records that Brian Bradford did indeed exist and was Richard's son from his first marriage to a woman named Christine, I arranged to meet him at a busy coffee shop downtown. Laura agreed to come with me, sitting at a nearby table as backup. Brian arrived exactly on time. He was in his late 30s with the same tall build as Richard, but none of his intimidating presence. He had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he spotted me and waved hesitantly. "Natalie, thank you for meeting me." He set a briefcase on the table between us. "I wasn't sure you would. Honestly, I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I verified that you're real." He smiled slightly. "Smart. That's more precaution than I took when dealing with my father, unfortunately. You said you were disinherited." Brian nodded, opening his briefcase and removing a folder. "My mother and father divorced when I was 8. He remarried quickly, a wealthy woman named Patricia. They had no children together. When she died unexpectedly, she left everything to him." He pushed a document across the table. It was a trust agreement similar to the one my grandmother had established for me. Patricia set up a trust for me before she died. She was my stepmother, but we were close. She had no biological children, and she wanted to make sure I was taken care of. There was about $300 0 inches there for my education and future. My stomach tightened as I saw where this was going. Let me guess. You never saw that money. Not a penny. By the time I found out about it years later, the account had been drained. My father claimed that as the trustee, he had made investment decisions that unfortunately didn't pan out. But I later discovered he had simply transferred the money to his personal accounts, just like what he did with my trust, I murmured. Brian nodded grimly. It's his pattern. He targets wealthy women with children, ingratiates himself, then finds ways to control and eventually access their assets. He did it to my mother, to Patricia, and from what I've gathered, to your mother as well. He pulled out more documents, bank statements, property records, and what appeared to be email printouts. These are records I've gathered over the years. They show a pattern of financial manipulation that spans decades. Richard has been doing this his entire adult life. I leafed through the papers, my hands trembling slightly. Why are you sharing this with me now? Brian looked down, a flash of shame crossing his face. I should have done something years ago. When I heard about your case, I realized this might be my last chance to help stop him. I tried to fight him myself once, but he's very good at covering his tracks and intimidating people into silence. He's certainly trying to intimidate me, I said, explaining the harassment threats and Kimberly's escalating behavior. Brian's expression darkened. That's another of his tactics. When I confronted him about the trust money, he turned my half-siblings against me. They believed every lie he told them about me being greedy and unstable. Half-siblings, you mean, besides Kimberly? Yes, I have a half-brother too, from Richard's marriage before my mother. Scott wanted nothing to do with any of this. Last I heard, he lives in Oregon and has completely cut ties with the family. This was entirely new information. Richard had portrayed himself as having only been married once before, with only Kimberly as his child. There's something else you should know, Brian continued. Richard didn't just take your money. He's been systematically working to isolate your mother and gain control of her assets. He showed me emails between Richard and a financial advisor discussing strategies to convince my mother to add Richard's name to her accounts and property deeds. But why would my mother go along with this? I asked, the familiar hurt rising. She's not stupid. Brian hesitated. Has your mother's behavior changed over the years, become more erratic, more easily influenced? I thought about it. She's definitely different from how she was before Richard. More anxious, more easily swayed by him. She used to be so strong and independent. Look at this, Brian said, pushing forward, a document that appeared to be a prescription record. I found this when I was investigating my own case. Richard has had prescriptions filled for anti-anxiety medications and sleeping pills for years, but he doesn't take them. I stared at the document, the implications slowly dawning on me. You think he's been medicating my mother without her knowledge. I can't prove it conclusively, but I strongly suspect it. It's consistent with his pattern of control. Keeping her slightly medicated would make her more compliant, less likely to question his financial decisions. The thought made me physically ill. If true, it was more than financial abuse, it was a form of poisoning. But it would explain the gradual personality changes I'd observed in my once strong mother. There's one more thing you should know, Brian said, lowering his voice. Richard is planning to access another trust, your grandmother's remaining estate. He showed me legal correspondence suggesting that once my mother gained full control of my grandmother's remaining assets, which would happen on the 20th anniversary of her death per the terms of the will Richard planned, convince her to transfer those assets into accounts he controlled. That anniversary is less than 6 months away, I realized aloud. Exactly. Which might explain why they're fighting your lawsuit so aggressively. It's not just about the money you're asking for, it's about keeping the whole scheme from falling apart before they can access the remaining funds. I sat back, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Brian was revealing. This wasn't just about my stolen inheritance anymore. It was about a calculated long-term scheme to defraud not just me, but potentially my mother as well. I gestured to Laura, who joined us at the table. After brief introductions, she began examining the documents with her professional eye. "These look legitimate," she said after a thorough review. "But we'll need to verify everything independently." Brian nodded. "Of course. I can provide any additional information you need. Account numbers, dates, names, whatever will help." Over the next few days, Laura worked tirelessly to verify Brian's claims. Each piece checked out the multiple marriages, the pattern of financial manipulation, the suspicious prescription history. "He's telling the truth," she confirmed. "And there's more. I found records of at least 2 other women before your mother who lost substantial assets after becoming involved with Richard." The revelation transformed our legal strategy. What had begun as a case about my stolen inheritance had evolved into something much larger, exposing a serial financial predator who had hurt multiple families over decades. But the evidence about my mother's potential medication also complicated my feelings. If Richard had been manipulating her at this level, was she truly responsible for her betrayals? The angry part of me wanted to hold on to my resentment, but another part wondered if she too was a victim. Regardless of whether she was being manipulated, she still made choices. Laura reminded me gently when I expressed these doubts. "She chose Richard over you repeatedly. Understanding why doesn't erase the harm it caused you." She was right. Explanation wasn't the same as excuse. But the possibility that my mother had been systematically drugged and manipulated over years added another layer of tragedy to an already painful situation. As our court date approached, I found myself working closely with Brian, combining our evidence and strengthening our case against Richard. He had suffered his own trauma from Richard's actions, and in our shared pain, we found an unexpected alliance. I never thought anything good would come from what Richard did to me. Brian told me one evening as we organized documents, but if it helps stop him from hurting anyone else, maybe it was worth it. I wasn't sure I could be so philosophical about my own pain yet. But working with Brian gave me something I hadn't expected: a sense of purpose beyond my personal grievance. This wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. It was about justice for everyone Richard had harmed, and for the first time, I allowed myself to think that maybe, just maybe, that included my mother too. With our court date just 1 week away, the pressure reached its peak. Our case had grown substantially thanks to Brian's evidence, expanding from my stolen inheritance to a pattern of financial exploitation spanning decades. James was confident we had a strong position, but Richard wasn't giving up without a fight. The morning after our final pre-trial meeting with James, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Natalie Mitchell, a formal voice asked when I answered. "Yes, that's me. This is Harold Winston's office. Mr. Bradford and Mrs. Bradford would like to offer a settlement in the matter of your lawsuit." My heart raced. "I'm listening." "They're prepared to offer you $50,000 with the condition that all claims are dropped and a non-disclosure agreement is signed." $50,000, a fraction of what they had taken from me, not counting interest or damages. It was insulting. "That's not even a quarter of what was in my trust," I replied evenly. "Mr. Bradford believes it's a generous offer considering the circumstances. He's also willing to withdraw the complaints filed with your employer if you accept promptly." The implied threat was clear. "I'll discuss it with my attorney and get back to you." James was blunt when I called him. They're desperate. They know how damaging this case could be, especially with Brian's testimony about the pattern of behavior. This lowball offer is a last-ditch effort to make it go away before everything comes to light in court. I declined the offer that afternoon. Within hours, Kimberly, ignoring the restraining order, called me from a different number. "Mom is sick because of you," she spat when I answered. "Her blood pressure is through the roof. The doctor says she could have a stroke. Is that what you want? To kill your own mother over money?" The emotional manipulation was so transparent, it was almost laughable. "If Mom is truly ill, I'm sorry to hear that. But this case is about more than money now, and you know it. You're so self-righteous, Kimberly hissed. You have no idea what you're doing to this family. I think I do, I replied calmly, and I think you do too. Has Richard been dipping into your accounts too, Kimberly? Or are you still the golden child whose expenses are covered by other people's money? The silence on the other end told me I'd hit a nerve. Finally, she said, "You'll regret this," and hung up. I reported the call to James, immediately adding another violation of the restraining order to our case. The day before our court date, I came home from work to find my mother's car parked outside my apartment building. After months of texts and intermediaries, she had finally come in person. Alone. I stood on the sidewalk, frozen with indecision. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk away. Another part desperately wanted to hear what she had to say. Before I could decide, she spotted me and got out of her car. She looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes and a fragility I wasn't used to seeing in her. "Natalie," she said, simply, her voice catching. "Can we talk, please?" Against my better judgment, I nodded and led her up to my apartment. The security cameras Brian had helped install would record everything, which gave me some comfort. Inside, my mother perched awkwardly on the edge of my couch, looking around at the apartment she had never bothered to visit before. "It's nice," she said. "Cozy." "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, not sitting down. She twisted her hands in her lap. "I want you to drop this lawsuit. It's tearing our family apart." "Our family was already torn apart," I replied, "long before I discovered what you and Richard did with my trust money." "You don't understand the pressure Richard was under," she began defensively. "The business was struggling, and Kimberly's school—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop. This isn't about one financial emergency. This is about 15 years of systematic betrayal. You chose Richard and Kimberly over me every single time a choice had to be made." Tears filled her eyes. "That's not true. I love you, Natalie. You're my daughter." "Then why did you let Richard take my college money? Why did you let him throw away Dad's belongings? Why did you make my wedding day about Kimberly? Why did you blame me when Jake cheated?" Each question hit her like a physical blow. She had no answers, only tears and weak protestations. "Richard said it was for the best," she whispered. "He said we were a family, and family resources should benefit everyone. Except they didn't benefit me, did they? They benefited Richard and Kimberly. And you let it happen." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't know how to stand up to him. After a while, it was easier to just agree." The admission sparked a flicker of the compassion I'd been trying to suppress. "Has Richard been giving you medication, mom pills for anxiety, or to help you sleep?" Her head snapped up, shock evident on her face. "How did you know about that?" Brian told me. "Richard's son from his first marriage." "Did you know Richard has done this before? Married women with money, isolated them, then taken control of their finances? That's ridiculous," she said, but without conviction. "Brian is just bitter because Richard wouldn't give him money. The trust Brian's stepmother set up for him was emptied by Richard, just like my trust was. It's the same pattern, Mom. And you're part of it." She shook her head, denial written across her face. "No, that's not. Richard loves me. He takes care of me. He controls you," I corrected gently. "And he's been doing it for years. The medication, the financial decisions, isolating you from people who might question him. It's all part of his system." For a moment, I thought I saw a flash of recognition in her eyes, quickly replaced by the familiar defensiveness. "You've always been jealous of my relationship with Richard. You never gave him a chance." And there it was, the deflection, the blaming, the rewriting of history I'd come to expect. Whatever brief glimpse of self-awareness she'd shown was gone. "I'm not dropping the lawsuit, Mom," I said firmly. "Not just for me, but for you too. Even if you can't see it yet." She stood abruptly. "If you go through with this, you'll destroy everything. Richard says we could lose the house, our savings, everything we've worked for. You mean everything you and Grandma worked for, I corrected. How much of your current lifestyle comes from Grandma's money, mom money, that was supposed to be shared with me? She had no answer for that. Instead, she moved toward the door, then turned back, her expression hardening. If you do this, don't expect me to ever forgive you. The irony of her statement was so profound it almost made me laugh. That's the difference between us, Mom. I've spent my whole adult life forgiving you over and over again for choosing them over me. But you can't forgive me for finally standing up for myself. She left without another word. As I watched her car drive away from my window, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. For years, I had chased her approval, made excuses for her behavior, forgiven the unforgivable, all in the hope that someday she would choose me. Now I understood she never would. And strangely accepting that truth felt like freedom. I called Laura immediately. My mom just left. She came to try to get me to drop the lawsuit. Are you okay? Laura asked, concern evident in her voice. Actually, yes, I said, surprised to find it was true. I think I finally realized that I can't make her be the mother I needed. And that's okay. I'm going to be okay anyway. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I woke feeling clear and determined. Today wasn't just about money. It was about truth. It was about standing up not only for myself, but for every person Richard had hurt, including perhaps especially my mother. As I dressed for court in my most professional outfit, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman who stared back wasn't the girl who had spent years seeking approval that never came. She was stronger, clearer, more centered in her own worth. You've got this, I told my reflection. And for the first time in forever, I believed it. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, but it seemed to swell with tension as all the parties assembled. I sat beside James at our table with Laura and Brian in the row directly behind us for support. Across the aisle, Richard and my mother sat with Harold Winston, both of them dressed impeccably but looking strained. Kimberly sat behind them, shooting daggers at me with her eyes. As the proceedings began, I felt a strange calm. After months of preparation, threats, and emotional turmoil, we were finally here, the moment of truth. Judge Patricia Morales, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, listened attentively as James presented our case. He methodically laid out the evidence, the original trust documents from my grandmother, the bank statements showing systematic withdrawals for purposes explicitly not permitted by the trust, and the pattern of similar behavior with other victims. Your Honor, James said this is not simply a case of misappropriated funds. It is a pattern of calculated financial exploitation that has affected multiple families over decades. When it was Brian's turn to testify, Richard's face contorted with rage. He leaned over to whisper furiously to Harold, who tried to calm him down. Brian's testimony was devastating, clear, specific, and impossible to dismiss as mere family grievance. My stepmother, Patricia, specifically established a trust for my education, Brian testified. After she died, my father, Richard Bradford, systematically emptied that trust for his own purposes, just as he did with Natalie Mitchell's trust. This was not a one-time decision made under financial duress. This was calculated theft. When Richard took the stand, his charm was on full display. He spoke confidently about family financial decisions and acting in everyone's best interests. But under James's cross-examination, his carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. Mr. Bradford, James asked, holding up a bank statement, "Can you explain how withdrawing funds from Natalie Mitchell's trust to purchase a vacation property in your and your daughter Kimberly's names was acting in Natalie's best interests?" Richard stumbled through an unconvincing explanation about family recreational opportunities. And these withdrawals for Kimberly's private university tuition, how exactly did these benefit Natalie, who was simultaneously taking out student loans to pay for her own education? With each question, Richard grew more defensive and evasive, his carefully crafted persona fracturing under scrutiny. The most surprising testimony, however, came from my mother. When called to the stand, she looked pale and shaken. As she began to speak, I realized she was not fully supporting Richard's version of events. Yes, I was the trustee for my daughter's trust, she admitted. And yes, I authorized the withdrawals Richard requested. Were you aware that these withdrawals violated the terms of the trust? James asked. She hesitated, glancing at Richard, whose face had hardened. I wasn't thinking clearly during those years. Richard handled all our finances. He told me it was legal, that as trustee, I had discretion. And did you ever question these decisions? Another glance at Richard. Once or twice. But Richard said it was for our family's benefit, and I wanted to believe him. It wasn't a full vindication, but it was more honesty than I had expected. For the first time, my mother was publicly acknowledging, however, partially that what they had done was wrong. After 3 grueling days of testimony and evidence, Judge Morales delivered her ruling. Her voice was clear and firm as she announced her decision. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Natalie Mitchell. The defendants Rebecca Bradford and Richard Bradford are ordered to pay restitution in the full amount of $226, $500 representing the original trust amount plus accrued interest. Additionally, punitive damages of $75,000 are awarded due to the egregious nature of the trust violation. I sat in stunned silence as she continued. Furthermore, this court is referring evidence presented in this case to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges related to financial elder abuse in the handling of Elaine Mitchell's estate. Mr. Bradford, I strongly suggest you retain criminal counsel. Richard's face drained of color. This was more than we had dared hope for, not just restitution for me, but potential criminal consequences for Richard's broader pattern of exploitation. As we left the courtroom, Kimberly rushed past me, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She had been raised in Richard's manipulative environment, taught that taking from others was her birthright. Now, her perfectly constructed world was crumbling. Richard pushed past without looking at me, his face a mask of fury. But my mother lingered, her eyes meeting mine across the crowded hallway. Something passed between us, not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. A moment of truth after years of deception. She moved toward me hesitantly. Natalie, Not now, Mom, I said not unkindly. I can't do this today. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Another time then, she said softly before following Richard. Outside the courthouse, Laura, Brian, and James surrounded me, their faces jubilant. We did it, Laura said, hugging me tightly. You did it, James corrected. Your courage made this possible, Natalie. Brian shook my hand, his expression solemn. Thank you for finishing what I couldn't. Maybe now he'll be stopped for good. In the weeks that followed, the reality of our victory began to sink in. The financial restitution was life-changing, allowing me to pay off my student loans and even make a down payment on a small house. But the emotional vindication meant even more. After years of gaslighting and manipulation, my experiences had been validated. The truth had been acknowledged. 6 months after the trial, I was settling into my new normal. I had used part of the settlement money to start my own marketing consultancy with Amy as my first client and eventual business partner. Laura remained my closest friend, her unwavering support during the darkest times, cementing our bond into something like sisterhood. Brian and I stayed in touch, our shared experience, creating an unexpected connection. We weren't quite friends, not quite family, but something valuable nonetheless. Allies who understood each other's trauma in a way no one else could. As for my mother, our relationship entered a new and complicated phase. 2 months after the trial, she left Richard, moving into a small apartment and seeking therapy. Her doctors confirmed she had been over-medicated for years, her judgment and perception impaired by unnecessary anti-anxiety drugs and sleeping pills Richard had been giving her for her nerves. We began meeting occasionally for coffee, brief, careful conversations as we navigated our new reality. The trust that had been broken couldn't be instantly repaired, but tiny bridges were being built, one honest conversation at a time. I was wrong, she told me during one of these meetings, her voice steady as she finally spoke the words I'd needed to hear for years. I failed you as a mother. I chose a man over my daughter, and there's no excuse for that. Not Richard, not the medication, nothing. Why? I asked the question that had haunted me for so long. She considered carefully before answering. I was afraid. After your father left, I was so afraid of being alone, of failing you by not providing enough. Richard seemed like security, like safety. And once I was in it, it happened so gradually. I barely noticed the isolation, the control, the way he turned me against you. Did you ever really see me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Tears filled her eyes. I see you now. I'm trying to see you now. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. There were still days I felt angry, days the hurt was too raw. But there was also a new honesty between us that had never existed before. The greatest healing, though, came from within. The validation of the court case, while important, wasn't what ultimately freed me. It was the realization that my worth had never depended on my mother's recognition or Richard's approval. It had been there all along, waiting for me to claim it. On a crisp autumn evening, I sat on the porch of my new small house, sharing wine with Laura, Amy, and yes, even Brian, who had brought his new girlfriend to our informal dinner gathering. As I looked around at these people who had stood by me, who had believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, I realized something profound. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who stands beside you in your darkest moments. Sometimes it's about who helps you fight when you can no longer fight alone. And sometimes it's about building something new from the ashes of what was lost. I raised my glass in a toast. To chosen family, I said, and to second chances. As glasses clinked and conversation flowed around me, I felt at peace. The journey had been painful but necessary. By standing up for myself, I had found not just justice, but something far more valuable, my own strength, my own voice, and my own family of choice. What's your experience with toxic family dynamics? Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to stand up to family members? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, your story matters, and sometimes telling it is the first step toward healing. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength through life's toughest challenges. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it.